Archaea, bacteria, and viruses. Sized extra small. What is a prokaryote? All living things fit into one or two major groups, prokaryote or eukaryote. Eukaryotes are made up of one or many cells. They each have a nucleus enclosed by a membrane. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles, and almost all are single-celled. Prokaryotes are so small we can only see them with a microscope, so they are microorganisms. Prokaryotes are divided into two domains. Bacteria is a domain of prokaryotes that usually have a cell wall that are usually reproduced by cell division. Archaea is a domain of prokaryotes that are genetically very different from bacteria and have a unique chemical in their cell walls. Although they are very small, prokaryotes can get energy and reproduce, and many can move. A handful of soil can contain trillions of prokaryotes. Here are the cells that we got through talking about this last week. Eukaryotic cells with a nucleus and all the different organelles. And this is the cell we will be talking about this week, bacteria and archaea. They are prokaryotic cells. They contain DNA. They contain cytoplasm and a cell membrane. And here is a video that talks a little bit more about prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells.
I'll never forget a circular red spot I developed on my arm when I was in elementary school. It left a lasting memory in my mind because it was something called ringworm. And with my active imagination, I thought I was now infected with a ring-shaped worm. I learned you gotta be careful about names because ringworm isn't caused by a worm at all. It's actually a fungus, which it turns out is pretty common and can be carried by many things like pets or soil. And since up to that point I was used to antibiotics as a way to treat infections, I assumed I'd be given antibiotics. But I wasn't. I was given an antifungal cream instead, and it went away. So it made me wonder, what made it different from the bacteria that had made me sick in the past? Why wasn't I given antibiotics? Well, antibiotics target bacteria. Antibiotics can destroy bacteria by affecting their ability to reproduce, damaging their cell walls, or interfering with their ability to make proteins that they need to survive. Just some examples. But it turns out bacterial cells and fungal cells are very different cell types. In fact, fungal cells have more in common with your cells, which are animal cells, than they have in common with bacterial cells. And that has a lot to do with the comparison of prokaryotic cells with eukaryotic cells, which is what we will focus on. First, just a refresher, recall that the modern cell theory includes a statement that all living things are made of one or more cells. All living things. In the three domains of life, prokaryotes are organisms that can be bacteria or archaea. They are unicellular, which means they are single-celled organisms. Eukaryotes are organisms that fit all in this last domain, eukarya. Eukaryotes can be protists, plants, animals, or fungi. They can be unicellular or they can be multicellular, which means they can be made up of many cells, like you. By the way, just to clarify, the word prokaryote is typically used to refer to the organism itself. When you are describing its cell, you are describing a prokaryotic cell. Same for eukaryote. Eukaryote typically refers to the organism itself, and when you are describing its cells, those are eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells do have a lot in common. Both have DNA. That's critical because DNA is the cell's genetic material. Both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells have ribosomes, which are small organelles, an organelle being like a tiny organ. The ribosomes have the important job of making proteins. Gotta make protein. Both cells have cytoplasm, the jelly fluid within cells. Both of them have a cell membrane, also known as a plasma membrane, which is critical because it controls what goes in and out of the cell, and therefore maintaining homeostasis. All cells have a cell membrane. Now, as for cell walls, most prokaryotic cells have cell walls. Many eukaryotic cells, plant cells and fungal cells, for example, can have cell walls. But there are plenty of eukaryotic cells that don't have cell walls, such as animal cells. What makes prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells different is especially interesting. Eukaryotic cells are more complex than prokaryotic cells. They tend to be larger than most prokaryotic cells. And to help me remember some more differences in this next part, I like to remember that pro in prokaryote rhymes with no, and eu in eukaryote rhymes with do. Prokaryotic cells have no nucleus to contain their DNA, so you will find their DNA is not contained within a nucleus. It's a bit messy here. They have no membrane-bound organelles. Membrane-bound organelles are fancy organelles that have their own membrane, like the nucleus, mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi apparatus. A big indicator of eukaryotic cells is this nucleus. Eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus to contain their DNA. Depending on what type of eukaryotic cell it is, it could have different types of membrane-bound organelles. For example, a plant cell is likely to have chloroplasts, while an animal cell would not. Wow, look at all this alphabetized vocabulary. If you want to try to practice your skills, pause the video and see how many of these vocabulary words you can use to compare and contrast prokaryotic cells with eukaryotic cells. It's important to grasp that all cells of living things fall in one of these two categories. And understanding the characteristics of these two cell types can help us better understand the diversity of living things, whether they are archaea, bacteria, protists, fungi, plants, or animals. And in the case of my example, realizing whether an infection you're dealing with involves prokaryotic cells, such as bacteria, or eukaryotic cells, such as the fungus. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
On the lines below, describe the characteristics of prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. You'll need to write this on your paper. Two prokaryotic cells that we're going to talk about. The first one is going to be archaea, and then the next bacteria. The thing you need to remember most about archaea is that they are very extreme. They can survive and thrive in extreme conditions. Archaea are organisms that have a very unique molecular trait. Like bacteria, archaea are prokaryotes, but the cell wall of archaea are chemically different from those of bacteria. Archaea often live where nothing else lives. Scientists have found them in the hot springs of Yellowstone National Park. They can live in extreme acidic and extreme salty habitats. They flourish near deep sea vents where no light reaches, and they can use sulfur to convert energy. Archaea have been found living 8 kilometers, or almost 5 miles below the Earth's surface. It was once thought that archaea only lived in extreme environments, but recent research has shown that archaea are everywhere. Bacteria. What are some characteristics about bacteria? Most known prokaryotes are bacteria. The domain bacteria has more individuals than all other domains combined. Many bacteria are consumers. They get their nutrients by feeding on organisms. Some bacterial consumers are decomposers, which feed on dead organisms. Other bacterial consumers live in or on other body of another organism. Bacteria can also make their own food and are called producers. These bacteria use energy from sunlight to make food and are often green. They are single-celled. Bacteria are small, single-celled organisms. Some bacteria stick together to form strands or films, but usually each bacterium still functions as an independent organism. Each bacterium must take in nutrients, release energy from food, get rid of waste, and grow on its own. So they are considered living organisms. They come in different shapes. They can be round, spiral, or rod-shaped. Most bacteria have a rigid cell wall that gives them their shape. Each shape helps the bacteria in a different way. Bacteria that are shaped like spirals can move like corkscrews. Bacteria shaped like rods quickly absorb nutrients. Bacteria that are round do not dry out quickly. Bacteria live everywhere. Bacteria can be found almost everywhere on Earth. They can be found breaking down dead material in soil, making nitrogen available inside plant roots, and breaking down nutrients in animal intestines. They can be found at the top of mountains and even in Arctic ice. Some bacteria can survive during periods when environmental conditions become harsh by forming endospores. An endospore is made up of a thick protective coating, the bacteria genetic material, and cytoplasm. The endospores can survive in hot, cold, and very dry places. When the conditions improve, the endospore breaks open and the bacteria becomes active again. What is the advantage of bacteria that form endospores? They don't risk becoming extinct.
Huh, that's odd. Moby, did you clone a microscopic version of yourself? Why do I not believe you? Dear Tim and Moby, what are bacteria? From Sarah. Bacteria are single-celled microscopic organisms, and they make up one of the 6 kingdoms of life on Earth. They're also the most abundant form of life on Earth. There's something like 5 nonillion of them right now. 5 nonillion? That's a 5, followed by 30 zeros. Even though they're too small to see with the naked eye, bacteria are all around us. They live in our food, our water, our air, and even inside our bodies. In fact, there are more bacteria inside your digestive tract than there are human beings who have ever lived. Well, I guess there aren't any in your digestive tract, but the ones in my digestive tract are pretty important. They break down molecules that my body can't digest by itself. And without bacteria, cows wouldn't be able to eat grass. Plants need bacteria too. They convert nitrogen in the soil into simpler structures that plants can absorb more easily. Of course, not all bacteria are our friends. Some of them can be pretty nasty, actually. Bacteria are responsible for strep throat, food poisoning, tuberculosis, and a whole bunch of other diseases. Don't worry, most of these infections can be treated by drugs called antibiotics, which kill the offending bacteria. Oh no, bacteria actually come in lots of different shapes and sizes. But the most common forms are rods, spheres, and spirals.
Some can't move, but others move using whip-like strands called flagella.
But whatever they look like, bacteria are prokaryotic cells, meaning that their nuclear material is not surrounded by a membrane. Right, unlike animal and plant cells, most bacterial cells don't contain many complex organelles. Inside their cell walls, they're pretty simple. There's a nucleus-like structure called the nucleoid, which contains genetic material, and also some ribosomes, which make proteins. But that's pretty much it. Some bacteria are able to generate their own energy through photosynthesis, and some survive by digesting chemicals in their environments. Most bacteria reproduce asexually in a process called fission. Fission produces two cells with the same genetic material as the parent cell. Some bacteria, though, exchange genetic material in a process that's closer to sexual reproduction. Well, two bacteria can exchange genetic material through a thin tube. Bacteria can reproduce very quickly, sometimes as fast as once every 20 minutes. Because their structure is so simple, bacteria can mutate really quickly too, which means they can evolve pretty fast. One thing's for certain, though, life as we know it wouldn't exist without bacteria.
On your next page, it talks about how bacteria reproduce by binary fission. We won't be talking about that, but I do have another little video to show you about that shows that process, binary fission.
Prokaryotes are microscopic single-celled organisms, including bacteria and archaea. Prokaryotes are everywhere. If you looked, you'd find bacteria on every object around you. One reason bacteria are so ubiquitous is that they multiply very rapidly. How do they multiply so quickly? Let's look more closely at prokaryotic cell division. Prokaryotic cell division is a process by which a cell divides into two or more cells. The process of prokaryotic cell division is called binary fission, which is a simpler process than found in eukaryotes. Recall that prokaryotes differ from eukaryotes due to the lack of a nucleus or cell organelles. Typically, their chromosomes consist of a single loop or circle of DNA. The circular DNA molecule replicates. It then attaches each copy to a different part of the cell membrane. The cell grows to twice its size, and the membrane pinches in the middle. The cell can now undergo binary fission. Binary fission is the prokaryote form of asexual reproduction. After the cytoplasm divides, each daughter cell synthesizes a new cell wall, creating two identical cells. Binary fission results in two cells that each contain one copy of the original circular DNA. Prokaryotes are able to multiply rapidly because of their small size. Their DNA takes a short time to replicate, and with a high surface area to volume ratio, they can absorb nutrients quickly. Also, the relative simplicity of the cell's internal organization allows rapid duplication. A bacterium can divide every 20 minutes in optimum conditions. Unchecked, bacterial population growth is exponential, allowing rapid colonization of a favorable environment. Scientists can apply knowledge of prokaryotic cell division in disease prevention and care. Through the use of antibiotics, doctors and scientists can slow or stop the growth of disease-causing bacteria. Some beneficial prokaryotes aid in digestion. Other prokaryotes play a role in the environment and are used for cleanup of toxic waste and bioremediation programs. It's no exaggeration to say that prokaryotes are an essential part of life on Earth.
So bacteria can be helpful, it can be harmful. And now we'll move on to viruses, our last. One second.
cell division is required.
There we go. Sorry. Okay, viruses, alive or not alive? What are some characteristics of viruses? A virus is a microscopic particle that cannot replicate on its own. It either gets inside of a cell or injects a cell with its DNA, often destroying the cell. Many viruses cause disease, such as the common cold, flu, and acquired immune deficiency syndrome. People, plants, animals, and prokaryotes can all be affected by viruses. Viruses are made of a protein coat and genetic material. The genetic material can be either DNA or RNA. The protein coat gives the virus its shape. Most viruses are smaller than most bacteria. About 5 billion virus particles can fit on a single drop of blood. Are viruses living? All living things are made of cells that contain genetic material, protein, and other chemicals. Like living things, viruses contain genetic material and protein, but unlike living things, viruses do not perform any life functions. Viruses do not use energy from nutrients. Viruses do not maintain homeostasis. A virus cannot grow. Viruses do not respond to stimuli such as light, sound, or touch. In fact, a virus cannot function on its own. A virus can replicate only inside a cell it affects. As a result, viruses are not considered living. List 3 reasons why viruses are not living things. They do not grow, they do not use energy, they do not reproduce. They replicate instead. You can see that they all come in different shapes depending on what kind of virus they are and what they are attacking. A virus will attack certain parts of an organism. Some just attack plants, some just attack people. And their shape helps them to connect to whatever cell that they are looking for. How do viruses replicate? Why do people stay home when they have a cold? They may not feel well enough to go to work or to learn, but people also want to prevent other people from getting sick. Some viruses, like the virus that causes the cold, can spread easily from person to person. How do they replicate and spread? First, they have to enter a host cell. Because viruses are not alive, they can replicate only inside of a living cell that serves as a host. A host is a living thing that a virus or a parasite uses for a resource or for shelter. Many viruses cannot be spread from one type of organism to another, and most can only attack certain types of cells in their host. Some viruses only attack certain types of bacteria. The tobacco mosaic virus can only attack certain types of plants, like the tomato plant shown here. People catch colds. People cannot spread a virus to a plant because it is a different organism. The first step in viral replication occurs when a virus enters a cell or when the virus genetic material is injected into a cell. Once the virus genes are inside, they take over the host cell. The host cell begins following the instructions coded in the viral DNA. The host cell replicates the viral DNA. The host cell makes new protein parts for the virus. Then the part of the new virus assembles in the host cell. When the cell is full of new viruses, the virus bursts out of the host cell. This step, called lysis, kills the host cell. The new viruses find new host cells and the lytic cycle begins again. And here is fill this out, fill in the blanks with the terms virus, host cell, and new virus. And this is the process. It starts here. A virus affects a host cell and injects the genetic material. This is the virus. It affects this cell. The virus genetic material takes over the host cell to make more viruses. And these are the new viruses that are created in the host cell. You can see that they are very, very small, much smaller than a cell. And once this virus has made as many as it can that would fit in there, they burst through there, usually killing the host cell, and they all go looking for new cells. And the cycle starts all over. I have one last video to show you about virus reproduction.
Every cell in your body is a tiny factory, constantly making proteins. Your genetic code, or DNA, directs every activity. Protein-making machinery in the cell reads the cell's own DNA and makes sure the cell proteins go where they're needed. Viruses have their own genetic code, but they don't have the machinery to copy their DNA. So viruses need your cell's machinery to reproduce themselves. A virus starts this process by using the keys on its surface to gain entry. Like a Trojan horse, it enters the cell. The virus releases its own DNA into the unsuspecting cell and hijacks the protein-making machinery. Now, this vital cell function becomes an assembly line for new virus particles. No longer in service to your body, the cell now serves the virus, manufacturing thousands of new virus particles, which are released to enslave more cells, thousands and thousands more.